A surprise signing in Minnesota is exactly the cavalry this secondary needs, as Kwesi and company have many moves to make to keep Brian Flores and fans happy, which includes an alternative use for the franchise tag that will please all parties involved. We're going to be breaking down all of that in this episode of Vikings Digest, but first make sure to hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon so you don't miss any updates surrounding the Vikings as we head into the beginning of free agency very, very soon. And with that, let's hop into the first topic of the day, which is secondary replacement incoming. That could definitely be the case. As we know with defensive coordinator Brian Flores, he likes to deploy his safeties in creative ways. And as we stand, rising star Josh Metellus is the only player left from last year's entire starting secondary, who all of which had a pick at least one at some point in this season. With Harrison Smith's contract and potential retirement in limbo and Cam Bynum among the team's many pending unrestricted free agents, the Vikings will almost certainly add to at that position in either free agency or the NFL draft. And Pro Football Focus did put out who they would like to see the Vikings go out and get as a free agent and in the draft. And the free agent signing being Jevon Holland from the Miami Dolphins, and that first round draft pick being Malachi Starks from Georgia. Starting with Holland, the Vikings are facing a massive rebuild of their secondary, with Josh Metellus standing as the lone quarterback or safety under contract who recorded 80 or more defensive snaps this past season. Snagging the top available safeties in both free agency and the draft would surely set this secondary up for success. And as far as Malachi Starks, briefly, in the 25-year-old Holland and the 21-year-old Starks, Vikings would have a vaunted tandem of young safeties to build their defense around for years to come. Given the creativity displayed by Brian Flores' play calling, the possibilities are endless if he adds these pieces to his unit. Now, we did cover the potential of Minnesota drafting Malachi Starks in an earlier video, so if you guys want to go and check that out, that is on our channel. We went into all of the things that makes him a great addition to this Vikings team and how he would fit. Initially, we were talking about him just being the replacement to either Byron Murphy or Harrison Smith, but with this proposal case going out and getting Holland and drafting Starks, PFF is kind of saying, hey, you have a replacement for both Byron Murphy and for Harrison Smith if you were able to go out and get these pieces. And Holland carries a hefty price tag as Spot Track projects his next contract to be in the range of about $60 million over 4 years. Now, with that said, the Vikings have the cap space to take on some big swings this offseason, and Flores was the head coach of the Dolphins when Holland was drafted in 2021. So that last bit, not only does it help as to why he would be a perfect scheme fit on this team because Flores drafted him, but that could also be something that incentivizes him to maybe take a little bit less. Now, I know that it'll be really tough for Holland to deny some hefty prices and offers that are going to be coming his way as a result of this offseason, but the former Oregon star is a Brian Flores prototype. Per PFF, he spent just 50.8% of his defensive snaps lined up as a typical free safety this past season. He spent the other half either down in the box at 27.5% or at slot corner at 16.6%. That positional fluidity would allow him to fit seamlessly with what Flores and the Vikings do on defense. Holland essentially played the Harrison Smith role for the Dolphins, which would make him a potential replacement for the Vikings icon should he opt for retirement this season. Now, I think this would be perfect for Minnesota if Holland is the Harrison Smith replacement. As far as replacing Byron Murphy, we're going to touch on that in a second as far as the implications or what they could do in that sense. But Malachi Starks also would be a decent replacement for him. But looking at Holland and how he would be the perfect replacement for Harrison Smith, I think that's awesome because he is younger. We know Harrison Smith, he's getting up there. We know retirement is on the cusp. If he does decide to come back from one more run, that's even more reason why Minnesota needs to win a Super Bowl next season, just to give him that one last hurrah and have him ride off in the sunset. However, if he is at the end of his road and he does decide to ultimately retire, amazing career for Harrison Smith, absolute legend, first ballot Hall of Famer, no questions asked. But you bring in Jevon Holland, you have that perfect replacement right off the bat. So there's not any growing. There's going to be some growing pains initially, but he'll already fit into this Brian Flores defensive scheme. And you're not having to go out and fully trust a rookie or a free agent who's a bit less than that and doesn't have that chemistry with Flores or fits the scheme as perfectly. You won't have to have that one year growing period or that half a season growing period where they're kind of getting adjusted and finding their lane. Jevon Holland, he's already got that. He's already in that groove because he was used the exact same way that Minnesota uses Harrison Smith. So if he already has that, comes over, Brian Flores' defense, he knows that. So he's not going to have to adjust too much there. It's only gotten more creative. And as well, that chemistry and this secondary, the chemistry between this secondary this season was insane. They were like glue. Josh Metellus, Cam Bynum, they were amazing for team morale. So you bring in Jevon Holland, who already can fit in with that that just boosts this locker room and that morale even more. So I think Jevon Holland, this was something that kind of came out of nowhere. When I saw this article, I didn't know what to make of it at first, saying like, wow, I can't believe he's available and that the Vikings can do this, especially with the salary cap going up into next season. So Minnesota has a little bit more freedom that they can do with this. But what do you guys think down in the comments below? Is Jevon Holland somebody you would be very psyched about going to get, especially if Harrison Smith retires? Let us know down in the comments below. But that's going to take us into our second topic of the day, which is a better use for the franchise tag. Whether it's a better use or an alternative use, you guys can be the judge. But that's why Kevin Seifert of ESPN is reporting that the Minnesota Vikings are not expected to use either the franchise tag or transition tag on Sam Darnold. The longtime insider and current Minnesota Vikings beat reporter reports that Kwesi and company seem more likely to let Darnold sign elsewhere if they choose to use their franchise tag. They're more likely to use it on pending cornerback free agent Byron Murphy. And as far as the full quote from Kevin Seifert, he says, in the end, the Vikings seem more likely to let Sam Darnold sign elsewhere and preserve their tag for a player such as cornerback Byron Murphy, who had a career-high 6 interceptions in 2024 and is hitting the prime at age 27. If nothing else, it would give the Vikings time to sign Murphy to a longer-term deal while keeping him off the market, and as well as clearing out some other space with other assets they can kind of offload until that comes to fruition next season. So this is a big thing that Minnesota, I think, needs to consider, because we've been talking about the transition tag, the franchise tag, and how it can apply to Darnold. There was a viewer who commented on the last video saying how we could use the transition tag on Darnold. It wouldn't be as expensive. However, it still would be about $35 million. I'm not willing to pay that for Darnold. I know that a lot of fans probably wouldn't as well. But if you're able to let Darnold walk, you trust in J.J. McCarthy and Daniel Jones for the first 4 weeks if you need to, or 6 weeks, because Kevin O'Connell, I think, could bring out some good football for a little bit before Daniel Jones would turn back into a pumpkin if that's the case. So you have that taken care of. That's a $40 million steep obstacle you don't have to worry about. So now you can kind of shift that over. Byron Murphy, that has been the other free agent where if it's not Sam Darnold, it's Byron Murphy that is a topic of discussion for Minnesota as far as players that they need to re-sign or free agents that they might not be able to get, or at least free agents that will be very expensive to re-sign. Sam Darnold, $40 million price tag. Byron Murphy, he's also going to be very expensive. So if Minnesota moves on from Darnold, they shift that franchise tag focus onto Byron Murphy. It buys you one more season. Yes, teams can make offers to him and he can take those offers if he wants them, but at least it goes to show that Minnesota is willing to pay him a little bit, and then if they get one more season out, they can pull through on that big contract and lock him down for hopefully the rest of his career. He's at 27, he's reaching his peak, and I think Minnesota does not want to give up an asset like this, especially when using the franchise tag on Murphy would be a lot more palatable from a financial standpoint. Murphy, who is projected by Spotrac to receive $22 million per season, 4 years, $88 million in free agency, would get a projected $20 million this season if he plays on the franchise tag. So $2 million left than what market value is expecting for him, but he would also be staying in a system that he knows, with a coach that he knows, an organization and a team that he has this chemistry with and the morale. And you can see with those stats there, he definitely warrants that $22 million price tag. However, if Minnesota can get him to stay in Minnesota, can get him to stay for a little bit longer, for maybe one more season until they can get that $22 million price tag that they might want, or something else, Minnesota can do that. And it's only going to cost $2 million less for Minnesota and for Byron Murphy. So there's not too much compromise there as well. It's not a case where he's expected $22 million and they're going to give him an $18 million tag. No, it's only $20 million. So a little bit of a gap there. Not crazy, not small either, but it is very manageable for Minnesota, especially when they have until March 4th to place their tag on Darnold or Byron Murphy, which is who I am hoping they do. But it's worth noting the Vikings have only used their franchise tag 3 times in franchise history since the franchise tag was created in '93. Safety Anthony Harris was tagged in 2020, linebacker Chad Greenway in 2011, Jim Kleinsasser, tight end, in 2003, and the Vikings have never used their transition tag. NFL free agency officially begins on March 12th. The negotiating tampering period starts on March 10th. So buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride for the Minnesota Vikings, and we are going to be bringing you all these updates. But what do you guys think on franchise tagging Byron Murphy, shifting the focus of tagging Darnold over to Murphy? Personally, I really love that idea. I think that would be the perfect way for Minnesota not only to avoid pigeonholing themselves with Sam Darnold, but it's the perfect way where just the last episode, we were talking about the potential of losing Byron Murphy, almost mentally prepping ourselves before losing him to the market and just choosing buying him over Byron Murphy as far as which ones to sign. But if you do this, you don't have to worry about pigeonholing Darnold. You don't have to worry about losing Byron Murphy in free agency. You can lock him down for one more year. You can go out, you can extend Cam Bynum because he's younger. He doesn't warrant as big of a price tag. And then you have the money to kind of work around it. And at least you have this iceberg of Byron Murphy, so to speak, pushed until next season, and you won't have to worry about that. So there's a lot of things here that I think are very interesting for Minnesota to consider. And I think this is something that fans and myself are definitely going to be fired up about, especially if it comes to fruition. But what do you guys think about all this as a whole? What do you think about Javon Holland potentially coming to Minnesota? What do you think about using the tag on Byron Murphy instead of Darnold? Let us know down in the comments below. But that's going to do it for this episode of Vikings Digest. I've been your host, Griffen. Take care.